I'm Lisa Evers, and this is Street Soldiers. Big-name comedians have always pushed the boundaries of what's socially acceptable, but now more than ever, it's easy to offend. So where do we draw the line between what's funny and what's not?
You can't even talk about, I have a gay uncle. You can't talk about that. I can't talk about my drug addict dad. I can't talk about being a bad parent or how my daughter doesn't listen. It's become that sensitive in society now.
Michaels points to comedian and film star Kevin Hart, whose homophobic tweets from 7 years ago cost him the Oscar hosting job. Picking a host can be a mission impossible for high-profile awards shows.
They're going after the Kevin Harts, the big comedians that are out there. They're loving them for their raunchy, pushing the envelope content. However, that same content doesn't appeal to the masses that follow the Academy Awards or the Golden Globes or any other award show that's happening in the industry.
More than a decade ago, comedian Michael Richards, who played Kramer on The Seinfeld Show, unleashed a tirade repeatedly using the N-word during a stand-up routine. Years later, he's still answering for it.
Everything that you say nowadays is under scrutiny. You can't even talk about, of course, certain communities. You can't talk about certain ethnicities unless you're that ethnicity.
Comedian Chelsea Handler came under fire in October after a political tweet about National Coming Out Day that was accused of being anti-gay.
Off-limit topics for comedians, race, religion, gender identity, LGBT jokes, these can all encompass things that comedians should probably steer away from, unless they are self-deprecating.
Even self-deprecating humor can be tricky, says Michaels, who believes the creative path is becoming more treacherous and narrower.
It has come to the point now that even when I go to colleges, before you step on stage, they're sending you a contract of things you can't say. You can't talk about this group. You can't talk about women. You can't talk about anyone in the crowd. It's becoming when you have a strict rule of guidelines where you're doing comedy based on this huge thing where you can't be funny or be natural to yourself.
So is the very nature of comedy changing? Let's find out what our panel has to say. Joining us now, Josh McBride. He's the East Coast reporter for the Daily Buzz and also an entertainment expert and commentator. Josh, great to have you.
Good to be here.
Thank you so much. Also with us is Rip Michaels, entertainer extraordinaire and star of MTV's Wild 'N Out. Rip, great to have you with us.
Hola, buenas noches.
Thank you so much. Also with us is Clayton Davis, editor and owner of AwardCircuit.com and founder of the Latino Entertainment Journalists Association, as well as being a member of the African American Film Critics Association. Clayton, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Thank you so much. As you look around the entertainment landscape, because you cover many shows, many programs, all sorts of celebrities as well, have we become more sensitive as a country?
Sensitive may not be the correct word. I think we are hyper aware of past indiscretions or past things that may be deemed offensive. I think where we are in particular today is that we are really quick to go and search and seek out these past things that we may not be necessarily proud of and may have been funny at that time or period. I think as a country, and media plays a big part in that, I think we need to get to the place of forgiveness and understanding. However, I think we have to give responsibility to the people who commit these deeds.
Commit these deeds. All right, that sounds like shots fired to me. Josh, in terms of people going back into history, you know, society has changed a lot. Our awareness has changed a lot. I mean, things even from our food to our mores to our social lives changed dramatically. Awareness has increased in a lot of areas, a lot more tolerance in a lot of areas as well. But when it comes to comedy, to go back to a comedian's routine from years ago, what's your, like we saw with the Kevin Hart situation, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I still think that there's this line, and I don't think it's that fine anymore of what to sort of say and not to say. I think that there's this stronger, thicker line that says, I can be self-deprecating and be funny because that's who I am, but when it comes for coming for someone else's culture or nationality or how they identify in the LGBT space, I think that there is this thick line that says, I'm not going to come for anybody else, but if I'm talking about my own culture or my own way of life, I can be funny because that's me. We've had a conversation, there's been a lot of other conversations about being able to use the N-word, right? And if it's appropriate for anybody. And I've always said that as a white man, absolutely never, no way, no how, but I can't answer that as a black man or as a black woman saying, is it okay for me to use it? Because I didn't grow up with the term. It's not a part of my culture. I just personally would never use it, and I don't think anybody...
So that's one line. There's one line that cannot be crossed.
Totally.
Rip, as a comedian, I mean, you do stand up. You've performed a lot in front of a lot of different types of groups. How do you personally, did you ever like go, oh, wait a minute, I went too far with that? Or you could tell by the reaction, or?
Well, to piggyback off what they said, the America has become super insensitive, like on off the rip. I don't know if you knew this, but we had a clip that me and Cardi did from one of our sketches. Was called "The Real House of the Civil Rights Movement," and Cardi B played Coretta Scott King, and it got a lot of people offended, and it was only because her accent was so thick. It was a great sketch, funny, had a lot of informative things, but people didn't see that because they were just blinded by the fact that Cardi B, because she doesn't do accent, she's gonna always sound like Cardi B no matter what character
Right, exactly.
she played. So, and we were just poking fun. It wasn't like we were poking fun at the Civil Rights Movement or the Real Housewives of the Civil Rights Movement. We were just poking fun at the fact that we were making fun and mockery of the shows that you see today. Like you see all the Basketball Wives where everything, and these women are just super ratchet, throwing drinks in each other's faces.
Right.
And we were showing that these women back then wouldn't be like that. Can you imagine if these women of class would subject themselves to that? And then everybody got super mad. I ended up on TMZ trying to explain that Martin Luther King's daughter that I wasn't trying to be offensive at the same time. So yeah, it is super sensitive.
But were you surprised that people got so offended by that?
Yes, I was surprised they got so offended by that. Being on TMZ and then trying to explain the one way Cardi did where she got, because Cardi is Spanish and we did this thing called etiquette. And it's showing people how to be a proper, which was more of a relived sketch from Eddie Murphy when he did how do you want to be a when he did the thing when he was trying to show. And this whole etiquette thing was just showing women how to be a proper. Since everyone wants to do it, what better person to teach than Cardi B how to be a proper.
What do you think about that?
I was like combining what Josh was speaking in.
And you guys feel free to jump in, please.
Yeah. I think as a collective media watching society, we don't have a level of consistency on what we deem to be offensive for one person to say versus another. And I say this as someone who's both Puerto Rican and black. And I think there's this gray area where certain people live, and I put myself in this gray area. So if I said the N-word as someone who's black but light skinned, it may get a half a second extra look as opposed to someone who isn't light skinned like me and just a regular dark skinned black man living in America. So I think we are just not consistent on our feelings, and I think it becomes confusing to everyone collectively about what
can you say and what can't you say.
I think Josh has a great idea, and he's like, listen, as a white man, I shouldn't say the N-word,
especially with the ER.
Yeah,
never exactly.
Or at all, like in general. But I think we all need to like kind of take a step back and start learning about each other. And I say each other, I mean each other's cultures.
Yeah, but is society just really built for that? We're like in the Insta age. Everything has to be instant. And people see a headline, they see one headline, which sometimes, as I'm sure you know, Clayton, when you're researching and reading things and writing things, people will see a headline that, and you too, doesn't really have anything to do with the story that follows it, and they'll see the headline and they'll base their judgment on that, and then the outrage machinery goes into full blown mode.
Yeah, I think the hard part is with these comedians that are involved in this space, some think it is okay to cross the line and stay over the line. Before this show, we started talking about Louis C.K. and how he was in a room of Ricky Gervais and Chris Rock and Jerry Seinfeld. Louis C.K. thought it was completely okay to say the N-word with the ER at the end and say that was okay for him to say, and him and Chris Rock had a dialogue about it. Now, he thought it was okay. Jerry Seinfeld was in the same room and said that he can't find the humor in it. Jerry Seinfeld, to me, thought, logically saying, "I'm not going to cross over that line."
He was a voice of reason in there, and I think in that instance, a lot of people from the black community felt that Chris Rock didn't stick up for the black community as being the only black man in that room. That's just a general feeling about it. I'm not saying I agree with that, but there are people.
All right, we're going to pick up on that when we come back. This is Street Soldiers. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. We'll be right back.
You know what? Either you're going to be a fan of my comedy or not. And that's what comedy is. It's supposed to be subjective to people. People are not supposed to like your comedy. It's not supposed to be for everybody.
Let's talk about the Oscars for a minute. They approached Kevin Hart, wanted him to be the host of it, I guess last year. Maybe you can give us a little bit of the history here?
Sure, yeah. So Kevin Hart gets approached to host the Oscars. Is a lifelong dream of his. He accepts the gig, and then videos emerge from his past stand-ups saying some really insensitive things about the LGBTQ community. And the problem, I feel, and everyone can chime in here, is not necessarily what was said. It was his reaction to the anger that people were upset with him for what he said. So
Which was 7 or 8 years ago,
was
right?
7 or 8 years ago when he spoke about his son. He wants his son not to be gay.
Right.
So in this situation, he says it comes out. He's trying to defend himself, but he's delegitimizing the feelings that the LGBTQ community are having regarding his words. And I believe had he just immediately came out and just been like, sorry, my bad, 8 years ago I was a knucklehead, I tried to do better, I will do better, everyone would have been fine with it. But for 24 hours or so, he was rambling on Instagram live feeds, saying nonsense and like defending his actions, but not in a I'm sorry way. Like that's just who I am, and y'all need to just accept it. And
Like if he had said, Josh, do you think if he had said, I'm so sorry that was 7 or 8 years ago, I've come to understand a lot more, I don't feel that way now, do you think that would have changed it? Do you
Yeah,
think it was the
absolutely.
reaction that just blew that into this whole, hurricane of disaster?
Absolutely. There wasn't an initial apology, which I think is the hard part. And I know Kevin. I've worked with Kevin before. I've interviewed Kevin before, and he's a genuinely nice person. I don't think he meant any harm by it. My problem was, again, like Clayton said, there was no initial apology. The apology came days later on the Ellen show when he, formally kind of apologized. But this was almost like when you're a little kid and you're stuck in your way and you're I'm not getting out of my room. Forget
And they got you
you
by the back of the neck, like, go apologize to him.
And it's a no, but no one was pressuring him to apologize in the first place. I don't think there was like this need to apologize. The fact of the matter is, if he had apologized initially and said, you know what, like that isn't me anymore. I was thinking about this as Clayton was talking. Hillary Clinton, when she ran for president 8 years ago, she said a marriage should be between a man and a woman. Now she runs for president and she's open to LGBT marriage, things like that. So people change, I understand it, but there was no initial sense of like, here's the issue. You know what? I don't mean those things I said anymore. People screw up and people move on.
yeah,
But it was Rip, that was all under the context of comedy too.
First of all, you gotta look at comedy. Comedy is tragedy turned upside down. That's what comedy is. That's pure definition of comedy. That's what it's always set up to be, is taking something tragic or taking something that's unpopular or taking something that's negative and turning it into something positive. That's what comedy is. So for him to apologize, and Kevin has been apologizing that for so many times. Like that's been haunting him. So it's like, okay, enough. I'm not going to keep apologizing. I'm going to live in my lane of my voice of comedy. This is comedy. It's backdated. I shouldn't have to apologize for the type of comedy, and that was the climate of comedy back then. If you look at climate of comedy, that's what everybody was doing back then. So
There were a lot of
apologize for the same thing over and over again. Afterwards, you go like, you know what? Either you're going to be a fan of my comedy or not. And that's what comedy is. It's supposed to be subjective to people. People are not supposed to like your comedy. It's not supposed to be for everybody. You have a lane and a core people of people who follow what you do or like, because there's so many different forms of comedy. It's slapstick. It's so many different ways of doing it. And you don't have to please everybody.
I think that the hard part here is, though, that he was asked to host the Oscars, which is like the Super Bowl for the LGBT community.
Yes,
that is the real underlying problem here, is that he was asked to host our biggest award show, our Super Bowl that there is.
It's not the Bravo
Right.
Awards.
It's not. It's not Real Housewives reunions. We don't. For us, it was offensive, but playing into it now, it was kind of like, just accept it because you work with all these people. These people are all around you. This is Hollywood,
Right, and he's made so many movies. He's a huge star.
Yeah.
So
Right.
he probably had relationships with many people.
And I can't imagine he really feels that way now. I mean, again, it was he used that as a joke. I mean, I'm sure the guy has people all around him surrounded that are part of this community.
Rip, you perform all over the country, allegedly.
This is alleged.
I just perform here. No,
There's no proof of this.
I don't want to say anything, but
Just from 8th Avenue
allegedly. Allegedly.
Rip's gonna have a Netflix docuseries on his stand-up around the country. You're gonna find out if it really happened. or not.
Exactly. Do you find that certain jokes go over really well in one place and they just totally bomb in another because they don't get it, or because the culture's different or the local lifestyle's different?
to be totally honest, the climate does change from where you go. Certain things fly in certain cities, and certain shows don't. Like in colleges, they're more conservative. So some of the things you say in a nightclub are going to be totally different from what you would say at a college. They're more aware. They're very sensitive. When I do college now, it's totally changed. They're very sensitive. You can't step on toes. And the college board and NAC are like, oh, these things cannot be said. You can't make fun of anybody. So in the college, you can only do self-deprecating or talk about celebs when you do comedy.
Wow. So do they actually say to you beforehand, like when you're speaking at a college, like, make sure you stay away from this, stay away from that?
Oh, yes. You would definitely get a contract, and they will not pay you if you do go over these lines or if you offend anyone, because they want it to be just a fun show for everyone, and unlike a comedy club. And in comedy clubs, certain things don't fly. It's conservative comedy clubs versus, I guess, more urban comedy clubs. You got to be really careful. Some of the things they will not allow you to say and take you off stage. They have do's and don'ts now. Like, it's totally changing. The climate
even at a club, like a private
totally
club
changing.
until say, listen, we want you to be you,
Yes.
but we
Within
don't want
these
you to
guidelines.
talk
now
about
you have
this.
to be you within these guidelines. Unless you're like Chris Rock and everyone's just like, it's Chris Rock. We know what we're getting with Chris Rock. Unless
Right.
you're just doing arenas, and that's what it's becoming. It's becoming to the point where comedy is very difficult to do, because you can offend everybody with everything you say, no matter what you say. You can say something about hot dogs in the vegan community, like, hot dogs are not good for you. You can talk about cigarettes. It's just so many.
There's so many more people you can offend now.
There's so many groups have banded together. You name it, it's a cause for it.
Yeah.
It's like people who don't iron their shirts. It's a group of people. And I don't want to say anything, but it's
You
very,
love them,
very-
okay?
No, and especially like, being a mixed person, like, him, it lets you know, like, wow, I have an uncle. You have to explain that it's for someone you know, or it's part of your culture for it to be acceptable.
In order to say that.
Yeah.
In order
Can
to
I piggyback off that? Especially as someone from a mixed race, like growing up, like I grew up in the Bronx, right? And I lived in a predominantly black neighborhood. I wasn't black enough for the black people because I wasn't dark. And then I moved to Jersey in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, but I didn't speak Spanish too well. I wasn't Puerto Rican enough for the Puerto Rican people. I'm not white, so I'm not white enough for the white people. So I think in comedy, you're trying to appeal your physical appearance to your audience more so, because if I did
Of what they
stand-
think you
of what
are,
they think you
as opposed
are,
to what they know you
or what
are.
they will accept you saying in that aspect. Like Chelsea Handler hosting the VMAs in 2010, which is like the third highest rated, I think, VMAs in history. She said a lot of offensive stuff that day and got a lot of flack for it, but she was able to move on and just go about her business. And then you talk about like old TV shows, something like The Office, which is, I still watch it like at least once or twice a week.
My daughter loves this show.
Yeah, with Steve Carell. You can't do The Office today.
No.
And have it be taken the same way and get laughs out of it. You have to watch it knowing full well this was 2005 and this is okay for 2005.
And you brought up Chelsea Handler. Josh,
Yeah.
what about a different set of standards for female comedians versus male comedians?
I don't
Do we
necessarily-
tolerate more from the guys or not?
I don't think so, because Chelsea Handler, Sarah Silverman, Amy Schumer all got flack right after Kevin Hart. Definitely not as much, but they also weren't asked to host the Oscars as well.
And not as big as stars?
Yes, I would say so. And they also got flack for their, I think it was humor against the LGBT community. All of them three were perceived differently because they've shown a lot more support to the LGBT community as well. Going back to Kevin Hart, I believe he had a conversation with Don Lemon right after, just to piggyback off of the Kevin Hart conversation. And Don said, well, why don't you give something back or do something for, so that these people don't feel neglected from what you've said in comedy. And he said, that's just not why I was put here. That's not that's not something that I think that I need to be doing, or he doesn't want to put his energy towards that. And again, that's a personal choice. So of course, do what you want to do.
All right, I want to thank you all for being with us for this episode of Street Soldiers. Josh McBride, we appreciate it. Rip Michaels, Wild and Out, thank you, thank you so much.
Thank you. The bow with the whole.
Did you want to take a bow here?
No, just-
Okay. Clayton
Let's
Davis.
go over here.
Thank you so much. Dust off the shoulder, right? Okay.
just gonna go
Thank you
home.
so much for being with us, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Street Soldiers. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. Remember, use your mind. It's your best weapon. I hope it's your only weapon. Let's push for peace.